Hello, welcome everyone. What a fantastic turnout. It's such a pleasure to see you all. My name is Sherry Ryan, and I'm the Dean of the Marx School of Public and International Affairs. We are so happy and thrilled to be here this evening. And I just want to call out how thankful we are to Erwin and Rosalind Engelman, who are here with us in the crowd for the first time in many years. They provided the generous gift for the Lillie and Nathan Ackerman Lecture Series, and this is one of those lectures, so thank you. You can't see them here, right here. We very much, the Marx School so appreciates your generosity and your commitment to these topics that are very important. I'd also like to thank Anna D'Souza, who is currently serving as the Ackerman Chair, and so the gift from the Engelmans supports both this lecture series and an Ackerman Chair who oversees the delivery of this wonderful programming. So very, very thankful for this and for Professor D'Souza's effort to bring Renée Cummings here from the University of Virginia. We're expecting a wonderful event here this evening. I'd also like to call your attention to Marianne Lotto, who's joining us virtually. You can see her on the screen. She will be saying a few words about the amazing life of Rosalind's parents, the impetus for this wonderful gift to the Marx School, and also a little bit about her family's life. So I'll introduce Marianne Lotto. She's a lawyer, an academic, who's been devoted to civil rights and environmental justice. After starting her career at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, she joined the faculty at the Marx School of Public and International Affairs. She was actually one of us. Since that time, her experience includes 10 years as General Counsel of New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, a nonprofit civil rights law firm. And she served as senior staff attorney at Earth Justice. More recently, she was directing environmental injustice clinics at Vermont Law School and at Yale, where she was tapped to join the Biden administration. She currently serves as Deputy Assistant Administrator for Program Implementation in the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. Though she is here joining us this evening, tonight in her personal capacity as a member of the Engelman-Ackerman family. She's lectured widely. She's taught graduate law and undergraduate level courses. Her most recent writing focuses on civil rights enforcement in the environmental justice context and the role of lawyers in community-based movements for social change. So please join me in welcoming Marianne Lotto.
Thank you so much, Dean. As you said, I'm not here in, can you hear me? Yes. Thumbs up? Yeah, I'm going to assume you can hear. Yeah, okay. So I'm not here in my professional capacity, but to give greetings from the Engelman family and to express my deep appreciation to everyone in the room and online. I'm very sorry I couldn't be on campus for the Ackerman Lecture this evening. Many thanks to Dean Sherry Ryan and to the Ackerman Chair, Anna D'Souza, and also our former Ackerman professor, Professor Sonia Jarvis, who I understand is also on the program, and of course to our Ackerman lecturer this evening, Professor Renée Cummings. I'm very much looking forward to your remarks. As some of you know, this lecture series is named after my grandparents, Lillie and Nathan Ackerman, who arrived in New York in the early 20th century as immigrants from Russia and Poland. They were good people, decent people, actually inspiring people, who communicated and passed to us core values: love of family, generosity, hard work, an appreciation for nature, beauty, and music. And thanks to the generosity of my parents, who are in the room, Erwin and Rosalind Engelman, who, following in their tradition, honored their memory through this lecture series devoted to equality and justice. And I want to recognize them and other family members in the room and online. We spent a lot of time with my grandparents when we were young, and my grandmother shared detailed experiences of her persecution in Russia. She lived through the violence of pogroms, when she and others feared for their lives simply because of their religion. She and so many other immigrants hoped that by coming to the United States, they left behind the worst forms of discrimination, though we also know that racial discrimination and segregation has been ingrained in the culture of this country as well. By the end of my grandmother's life, she would tell us that she had seen a lot of change in her life. We used to joke, though it had more than a grain of truth, that for my grandmother, the mop was an incredible invention because she didn't have to be on her hands and knees to scrub the floor. That's how much change she had seen across her lifetime. So it's hard to imagine what she would make of today's topic. Although she was brilliant and creative, she'd often defer to my parents or us when faced with something newfangled to say, I don't know about this, you children, you're educated, you would understand this. So it might have been around artificial intelligence, justice, and equity. We might say to her, same issues of hatred and discrimination are implicated, but in a new form. This is a hot topic. Just this April, the Department of Justice and other federal agencies released a statement pledging to enforce civil rights laws as new technologies such as AI become more common. So, with my grandparents' legacy in mind, and with the lens of equality and justice, I'm very much looking forward to tonight's lecture, newfangled or not. And thank you all for your participation and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. It's such a wonderful story to hear about your family and the trials and tribulations. We appreciate that. Next, I'd like to introduce the Ackerman Chair, Anna D'Souza. She is in her 10th year at the Mark School. She's a development economist who studies issues related to food and nutrition security, price shocks, conflict, governance, and trade. Before joining Baruch, she worked as a research economist at the Economic Research Service of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where she received the USDA Secretary's Honor Award. She has worked as an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, a consultant for the World Bank, and a Peace Corps volunteer in Senegal. She received a BS in Finance and Economics from the Stern School of Business at NYU, and an MS and PhD in Economics from UCLA. Thank you so much, Anna. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I'll try that again. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. All right, are you ready for some fun? I mean, people, oh my goodness. We gotta make people who are online live streaming this, make them very jealous that they should have been, no, I'm kidding. We wanna make this accessible. We're very happy for those of you who are watching right now online. But I will say I am really, really pleased to see such a full house here. We are so grateful that all of you have taken time on this Thursday evening to be with us. I am not going to make very many comments on the topic because unless you have really not been paying attention in the past 2 years, you know that artificial intelligence has made major strides over the past few years. And why is that? Because before, many of us didn't know what artificial intelligence really was, right? We heard of it, some people use Siri, but once ChatGPT came out a few Novembers ago, the world transformed. It was the fastest adoption of any kind of app technology ever. And what has happened and what I've understood is it's not just that the public has started using this, but what has happened, I've heard from people in the industry, is that because of the excitement around generative AI, which is now the public's being able to use it, a lot of other organizations, and Marianne mentioned government as well, our Homeland Security, for example, agency, there's a lot more adoption that's happening more broadly with various forms of AI. So I'll just say that the reason I organized this lecture on this topic is not just because the topic of AI is hot and important, and I think here to stay. It's not just a hot topic, it's going to go away. It's kind of taking over already very quickly. But the Mark School and at Baruch and at CUNY, our mission, right, is to serve historically marginalized communities and immigrants and, immigrants like Renée and actually like me and probably most of you, half the people in the room, right? It's here to serve people who are New Yorkers trying to improve their lives and improve the lives of their families. And so that's where we think about the social justice implications, the ethical implications, the moral implications, And marrying the two seems like we need to do that very soon. Okay, so that's one reason, super important because of the mission here. And then the second reason is because I had the privilege of going to the CUNY IDEA conference, which is Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access Conference. Thank you, Marianne, right there, who organized it. And Renée Cummings was the keynote speaker. And I will tell you that many, many people in the audience were just blown away and so appreciative. And it's not because the topic is hot and all these, but it was the way that Renée came to this work and what she is bringing of herself. And here, this lecture is about equality and justice. And I think a lot of that starts within us. We have to do our own work to figure out how we can contribute, right? And so part of it is intellectual, but a lot of it is really what you're bringing, your spirit and your capabilities and your heart. And her 3 degrees from CUNY, let me also say that we don't want to take too much credit, but okay. There, so let me give you the official bio and then come on up. Renée Cummings is Assistant Professor of Practice in Data Science, Data Activist in Residence, and Co-Director of the Public Interest Technology University Network at the University of Virginia's School of Data Science. She is a non-resident senior fellow and co-director of the AI Equity Lab at the Brookings Institute. Professor Cummings is also the inaugural senior fellow in AI, Data, and Policy at All Tech is Human, a leading international think tank. She's a distinguished member of the World Economic Forum Data Equity Council, the World Economic Forum AI Governance Alliance, and the AI and Equality Initiative at the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs. She's also a member of the Global Academic Network at the Center for AI and Digital Policy in Washington, D.C. Professor Cummings works at the intersection of AI, artificial intelligence, criminal justice, racial justice, social justice, design justice, urban criminology, and public health. Many intersections, okay, and all critical in their own way. She is committed to using AI to empower and transform communities by helping governments and organizations navigate the AI landscape and develop future AI leaders. Listed among the world's top 100 women in AI ethics, she is a thought leader, a motivational speaker and mentor who has addressed various audiences, including policymakers at the US Senate. Finally, through her activism and research, Professor Cummings is creating space for people without traditional power to participate meaningfully in the process of designing, developing, deploying, and adopting AI. So I will ask you to join me in welcoming Professor Renée Cummings, the Ackerman Lecture speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that introduction. Let me say it is absolute honor and a pleasure to be with you this evening. It's also an honor because I have 2 special guests in the room. Of course, the Ackerman family. Thank you so very much for being here. I was told by Anna that it's definitely a big moment that you are here in person, and of course your daughter, Marianne, giving that fantastic introduction. So thank you so much for that. And of course, I was born in Trinidad and Tobago, although I moved to New York many, many years ago when I was in my 20s. And it is an honor and an absolute pleasure to have Mr. Andre Laveau, who is the official representative of Trinidad and Tobago in New York, my Consul General, who made the time to join me. Thank you very much. And his wonderful team, including his head of security, who is also here. So I feel very, very honored. So thank you very much. So we are going to have a conversation about artificial intelligence. And it seems as though all over the world, everywhere, everyone is talking about AI, artificial intelligence. So this conversation starts with I'm sorry.
No, I don't want to disturb you. I'm just trying to.
What are you trying to do?
This owl camera.
What is that, AI?
Actually, it's your daughter watching us.
Okay.
It's
So
disturbing that camera, but it's disturbing the guests here. So I'm trying to find a way to put it so it doesn't disturb you.
No, it does not disturb me at all. Where do you want it?
Wherever she could see you.
Is she seeing well?
I hope so.
Okay, good. It's okay, it's fine. So once everyone is seeing, we can start again. So, so this lecture begins with a very nice event that I will call it a very nice event that I attended on December 6th. And I was actually really excited being there because I knew if I was there, we were going to have the voice of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I was invited to the Senate by the team of course, a very dynamic team that was putting together these conversations on AI, Insight for AI. And when I turned up, I was a bit stunned because there were the godfathers of AI. And if you've been following or watching any of the news reports, many of these names will be familiar. So among them was Yoshua Bengio, who is considered one of the world's greatest computer scientists. He is at the University of Montreal. He also leads the Montreal Institute for Learning Algorithms. With him and sitting next to me was Stuart Russell. And Stuart Russell has written probably all of the big books on AI and human-centered AI. And of course, Andrew Ng, who is the co-founder of Coursera. Among them also some industry leaders, because it was a nice mix. Boston Dynamics, if you've seen those robotic dogs, you know who Boston Dynamics is. Of course, from OpenAI was the head of preparedness and the co-founder of Anthropic. So this was the 8th bipartisan Senate on insight when it comes to AI. We were looking at AI risks and alignment. We were speaking about doomsday approaches, doomsday scenarios, things that can go absolutely wrong with this technology. And while many of these individuals, some of the greatest scholars in AI, some of the greatest computer scientists in AI, were talking about these fictitious scenarios that could happen. AI taking over the world, AI just stepping out of the sky and attacking all critical infrastructure, AI probably taking over the White House. I was sitting there saying to myself, after about 8 years in this space, a doomsday scenario is when an algorithm denies you a benefit. A doomsday scenario is when an algorithm takes a child away from a home. A doomsday scenario is when a family is denied housing or a loan or credit. And for many of these individuals, some of the greatest scientists in the world, they were talking about fictitious scenarios when myself and many of the other individuals in the space were thinking about everyday moments where this technology, facial recognition, has really created havoc in the lives of individuals. So now we're going to speak about ethical and responsible AI for a more just and equitable future. And I think by that image, you understand how committed I am to justice and equality in this space. So AI is probably, at this moment, the greatest geopolitical game changer. And why is that? We keep hearing about it. Race for global tech leadership, tech Cold War, AI arms race, AI superpowers. Countries all over the world are positioning themselves. Countries all over the world, if they do not have a national AI strategy and a national data strategy, are designing, developing, and deploying those strategies as we speak. We've seen some of the top nations, the biggest nations, have met questions around how do we govern this technology? What are the kinds of legislations that need to be put in place? How do we deal with the risks? How do we uphold the rights? How do we harness this technology for the rewards? And why did AI become such a game changer? Well, 7 years ago, The Economist magazine anointed data as the world's most valuable resource. And there is no AI without data. Data is the lifeblood of artificial intelligence. So oil became the biggest, data became digital oil. And from what we know is that oil powered economic growth in the 20th century. We know that data is now the catalyst in the 21st century. And we know everything that we do is now being turned into data. So 7 years ago, data became digital oil. We knew that it was the fastest growing industry in the world. There were calls for antitrust legislators to step in, great concern about the control of this technology, the control of data, and calls to break it up before it got too big. But what did we see in 7 years? The most valuable companies in the world, 5 of those companies own all the world's data. We know these companies and their CEOs are now negotiating with world leaders. You have them going to the White House. You have them traveling all over the world and meeting with world leaders and negotiating how artificial intelligence is going to be deployed in these countries, how it's going to be regulated, the ways in which we need to think about advancing humanity with this technology. And we know that they're saying 3 things: AI, algorithms, and ChatGPT. So these are the companies. And we've all interacted with these companies, and we continue to interact with these companies in very, very intimate and very, very intricate ways. And you would ask yourself, how did these companies become so big? Look at these numbers. So these figures were taken from a list of the top 10, and you can see Microsoft was number 1, Apple number 2, NVIDIA number 3, Google came in at number 5, Amazon number 6, and of course Meta, formerly Facebook, number 7. And I will ask you, what does Facebook sell to be making that kind of money? So you're thinking about data. So AI governance is probably the biggest question at the moment. How do we govern this technology? How do we govern something that we cannot see? How do we govern something that is continuously emerging, something with these emerging capabilities that we still don't understand? Many of the designers of this technology, many of the deployers of this technology, still not fully understanding how this technology works. We know this. Many of the conversations have been around developing responsible AI. We know that conversations that have been about the political power of this technology, of course, the economic power, the social change, the ways in which this technology is changing just about every aspect of our lives. We know that legislation is a requirement, but we know there are conversations that too much legislation may undermine innovation, or whether or not we could innovate ethically. And we know there are major environmental concerns. AI is not cheap, and it is not cheap on the environment. We know it takes an extraordinary amount of computing power to get AI going, and we know while this technology is being heralded as doing miracles for the environment when it comes to climate change, we also know that this technology could be very devastating for the environment because of the extraordinary amount of computing power and energy that's required. We also know that when we're talking about AI, we've got to deconstruct it. So I've come up with this agenda deconstructing framework. So we know it's revolutionary, we know it's transformative, we know there are extraordinary rewards to this technology, but we know there are risks, and the risks are high. We know there are rights, because this technology has the ability to undermine many rights, civil rights, human rights. We know that representation is critical, because this technology lives and sleeps and eats and breathes data. We know that we have a responsibility, a social responsibility as developers, as users of this technology. We know that regulations are required. We know that we've got to build a resilient society. We also know that it's got to be reliable, it's got to be safe, it's got to be secure, it's got to be trustworthy, it's got to protect privacy. We know extraordinary resources are required, but we also know it's having radical impact on society. Just to bring us all up to speed on what's been happening in the US, 2022, the White House put out the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. This Bill of Rights provides 5 guiding principles as to how AI must be developed, designed, and deployed. It speaks about safe and effective systems. It speaks about protection from algorithmic discrimination, a right to data privacy, notification if an algorithm is being used to make a decision about you, and an explanation about those implications, and the ability to opt out if you choose to use a human alternative instead of an algorithm. In 2023, just to take it a step further, the White House put out another very, very important statement, and that was the executive order in October. And in this order, the president spoke about the United States seizing the promise of this technology, advancing American leadership internationally with AI, promoting innovation while protecting worker rights and ensuring there's consumer compensation, ensuring also that safety, security, privacy, trust were top of the agenda, managing the risks of this technology, but at the same time seizing the promise of AI. And Marianne mentioned it, the federal memo that came out of the Office of Management and Budget in March. And this memo establishes a baseline for protections when it comes to civil rights and, of course, safety. Federal agencies must now disclose what AI technologies they are using and how those AI technologies are going to impact society or impact the vendors or the customers, consumers, anyone interacting with that agency. And this memo really builds on the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights. It also builds on the executive order. It speaks about accountability, transparency, explainability, which are very critical. It speaks about our right to know what is being designed, how it's being designed, how it's being used, and the ways in which it can impact us. One of the very instructive moves with this memo is that it says that every federal agency has got to designate a chief AI officer in 6 months from March. The question is, we know that at the federal level, bureaucracy is a reality, and we're asking ourselves whether or not this is going to be a bureaucratic nightmare or if this is something that we are actually going to see. So when we think about AI, we've got to think about this ethically. If we want to do technology that is just and, of course, equitable, that is responsible. So there's a rights-based and a risk-based approach to AI. The risks-based says we've got to have the level of a sophisticated level of due diligence where we are able to detect, to mitigate, to manage, to monitor, and to take that feedback and improve these systems. So internationally, everyone is speaking about this risk-based approach, and of course there's the rights-based approach, which means while there are risks that we're paying attention to as we try to harness the power of this technology, we also have to think about rights, because this technology has the ability in real time to undermine civil rights and human rights. So now we're hearing conversations about data rights. What are our rights? As producers of data, what are our rights? Algorithmic justice, these algorithms that are creating a lot of chaos. How do we ensure that the decisions being made by these algorithms are just? And of course, due process. I'm a criminologist and criminal psychologist, and it is the work of due process that brought me into this space. So when we're thinking about AI and we're thinking about ethics, and I'm just setting up a state of play for you, we've got to think about fairness. Whether or not this technology, whether or not these algorithms are making decisions that are fair, decisions that are equitable, decisions that are just. Accountability is critical to this technology. How accountable is it? Who are the individuals building this? What's the data that they are using? How clean is that data? What is the quality of that data? The approaches, the methodologies that are being designed, how transparent are they? How explainable are they? What about accuracy? If the data is inaccurate, are the decisions going to be accurate? Is this technology going to be accurate? And how do we audit this technology? Doing those vulnerability audits, doing impact assessments, and questions around accessibility. Is it accessible to diverse groups, persons with disabilities? Safety, security, privacy, representation is so critical. Visibility, voice, conversations about geography, conversations about the global north versus the global south and emerging markets, and who has the rights to this technology, who has the money to develop the technology. How is this technology going to advance certain nations and keep certain nations back? What about sustainable development goals? Are all nations going to be able to achieve them? And of course, diversity and inclusion. Who's building it? Who's building it and what information are they using to build it? and of course, trust. One of the biggest challenges for AI is the question of trust. The EU AI Act is probably the biggest thing that happened in the world of AI in April. And what this, excuse me. I'm sorry, I was looking for my, my ice water. I'm sorry about that. So the EU AI Act really sets the tone. So all of the world is now looking at this act and using this act to build their own legislation. The EU took about 2 or 3 years to really pull this together to ensure that it was sealed and, of course, delivered. And it really serves in a similar space to the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation that was, thank you very much, enacted a few years ago. And what this does really nicely, thank you, is that it outlines the kinds of risks that we face with AI. And those risks could be from unacceptable risks, so any kind of cognitive behavioral manipulation, any technology that's going to manipulate your mind and manipulate your behavior and manipulate vulnerable groups, any technology that's being built to recognize emotions and make decisions based on your emotions are considered unacceptable. Any kind of predictive policing algorithm that's going to profile individuals and victimize individuals are seen as unacceptable. Voice-activated toys that encourage dangerous behavior in children, those are the things that have been outlined so far as unacceptable. Now, there are some high-risk things, and we will hear a little more about them. Biometrics, using biometrics in ways in which it was not intended to do. Any kind of algorithm that's making decisions about critical infrastructure, education, vocation, employment. Any kind of algorithm that's being used in financial services, that's denying anyone a loan. Any kind of credit scoring algorithm that may be undermining certain communities. Thinking about questions of fairness and how do we code a credit score? How do we code credit worthiness? Law enforcement, migration, asylum, border control, algorithms that are being deployed in those spaces, of course, any kind of algorithm that's being deployed for the administration of justice and any kind of democratic process. You're also going to hear a lot about the Brussels effect. And the Brussels effect is the question that I've been asked probably the most in the last 3 months. Everyone asking me whether or not I think the EU AI Act will have the Brussels effect. And that's basically whether or not the rest of the world is going to step in line and use this as a guiding framework, a guiding law. And it really speaks about the externalization, of course, EU standards and EU regulatory power, and works very similar to the GDPR. So that's the state of play. It's a lot, but it's going to get you ready for what's to come. And this is the big question. So what is AI? The world has been doing all of this conversation. Big nations, world leaders, world powers, every country in the world busy because of something called an algorithm. And we've had all of that, an act that has passed, that many people did not even know it was passed. And you're asking yourself, what is AI? What is artificial intelligence? I will say it is about possibilities. AI now gives us the ability to really reimagine just about every business model. The ways in which we are now using robotics in food production. We are using data in manufacturing and the ways in which we are rethinking our transportation. And of course, something like virtual reality and its impact on education. So what AI offers is a world of possibilities. It's not a new term. It was coined in 1956. Several scientists gathered at Dartmouth University for a summer project, which was considered a seminal event for AI as a field. Of course, when this happened in 1956, there were no women there, no people of color. It was just a conversation among some scientists of how they were going to do AI. I will say that the only definition from AI that I subscribe to is the one that it is still undefined. Because at the moment, there are many challenges around what AI is, what is AI supposed to be. Even questions around artificial intelligence. What really is artificial intelligence? What is an intelligence system supposed to do? And many of the biggest names in this space, many of the data scientists, the computer scientists, are still trying to figure that out. But we do know it's an algorithm doing very human-like tasks. We know it is a socio-technical system because of its impact on society. And we do know that we have a very intimate and intricate relationship with AI. So what are these human-like tasks? And many of them you've experienced. Speech recognition. Sometimes you're speaking on your phone about a particular product, and then that product pops up in every other social media platform. Everyone's shaking their heads, right? That you have. That's speech recognition on your phone that is now powering an algorithm to bring you a particular kind of content. Machine vision. We now have cars that are running on their own, running on data, driving themselves. Natural language processing, predictions, recommendations, and summaries. You've used your phone, you've Googled, what are the best restaurants? You've asked questions, what are the best movies? What are the top anything? And those are recommendation algorithms that are built to recommend. Of course, predictions. Of course, summaries. If you're using ChatGPT, a large language model, which is also an algorithm, you're asking it to do research. You're asking it to write letters. You're asking it to summarize. You're asking it to write sermons. You're asking it to write just about everything that you want to write. So these are all algorithms that are functioning in ways that make you feel as though you're engaging with a human. But we do know that AI is optimizing the human experience in ways that we're yet to imagine. We also know that every business model is being reimagined. We know that AI is solving some of the world's greatest challenges, but we also know it's creating new ethical challenges. So this diagram is just the anatomy, and I'm not going to go heavy into the data science because we don't want to do that. But AI just really got its extraordinary power within the last, let's say, 10 years from the computational power that we've been seeing in the realm, of course, computer science, data science, machine learning. Critical to the anatomy of AI is trustworthy, reliable AI, and of course, AI ethics. So what is an algorithm? An algorithm is a mathematical formula that provides instructions to your computer to perform a specific task. It's like a recipe. As you make a cake, as you bake cookies, as you follow a recipe, that's what an algorithm is. If you want a particular outcome, you're going to put in the data that is required to give you that outcome, and you're going to use a mathematical formula that really powers that. We do know that algorithms have been making decisions for quite some time in the criminal justice system for about 2 decades, and that's the work that brought me into this space. So you've heard about data-driven decision-making. Everyone's talking about that. That's about algorithms making decisions, automated decision-making, algorithmic decision-making, and all of this brings it down to fairness. And why is it about fairness? Because an algorithm using data, making a decision about you in which you are not involved, means that this algorithm now has an extraordinary amount of power. And that power that the algorithm now holds, it means that the algorithm has the ability to undermine your agency, your autonomy, your ability to self-actualize, your ability to determine your destiny in life, and of course, the ways in which you are building your identity. So an algorithm, something that you cannot see, is now making a decision about you and making a critical decision about you. So what does this algorithm introduce? And this is the risky part. We know the rewards, and we know the rewards are tremendous when we think about healthcare, when we think about an algorithm being able to predict a protein structure, or an algorithm doing extraordinary work in cancer research, or an algorithm just taking us into a virtual reality space where we can experience a learning module in just such an interactive way. But then there's the algorithms built on data, in particularly historic data that introduces bias, algorithmic bias, data bias, human bias. And why is that? Why is it important? Because an algorithm has the ability to undermine your liberties, your rights, questions around democracy, and of course, not serve justice in real time. This image, and no matter how many times I show it, it's always new for a few people. And what this image is from an investigative report that was done by ProPublica in 2016 that looked at machine bias in the risk assessment tools that were being used in criminal sentencing. And this really outlines very nicely the hidden effects of historical data. So the data in the criminal justice system really speaks to the many challenges that we are seeing in this space. So you can see the individuals. The scores next or under them speaks to whether or not they are high risk, low risk, or medium risk. And you have two seasoned perpetrators who are there for major offenses like robbery, attempted robbery, grand theft, of course, drug trafficking, domestic violence, with risk scores lower than 2 juveniles. And the sad thing is young Brescia Borden came out of her house, was about to pick up her little brother and sister from school, decided to use the neighbor's scooter, of course, without asking, and took it about 3 blocks and left it and ran off. And of course, her risk for sentencing is 8, which is very high, which means the criminal justice says something about the 16-year-old girl is sending a message that she should have a sentence more severe than an individual who participated in several armed robberies, another who is a drug trafficker, and of course, domestic violence. And you've got to ask yourself, what's in those data sets? And that's the question. So this is the data we're talking about that presents some very unique challenges. Facial recognition. Now everyone's using facial recognition. If you've been to the airport any time within the last how many months, every airline wants to take a picture of you. You also have the right to say that you don't want your picture taken, and that is officially a right of yours. The challenge is that you may delay the flight, or sometimes you just don't want the hassle, so many of us just allow them to do it and say, you know, whatever. But this case, 2019, Robert Williams in Detroit, arrested for shoplifting. His wife called him on the phone. He was on his way home from work. She said, the police are here and they are waiting to arrest you. And he thought it was a prank because he had never been involved in any kind of police activity. He did not know about the store. He was in no mall doing anything. The police were at his house. They had images of him using facial recognition technology, shoplifting at a high-end watch store in the mall. He was arrested, taken into police custody, spent about 15 hours until one of the officers decided to look at his driver's license and compare it to the images they had from the facial recognition technology, and they realized he was not the one. Of course, he was arrested in front of his wife and his family. This became a test case on AI, facial recognition for the American Civil Liberties Union, and of course, his family still very traumatized by the experience. Also in Detroit, Portia Woodruff, arrested at 8 months for carjacking. The police came to her house with images of her at a gas station jacking a car. She said, that's impossible, I'm 8 months pregnant. They said, well, the computer says it was you, so we're going to take you. Of course, she was taken, arrested in front of her young daughter. I think her daughter could have been 3. Of course, she's 8 months pregnant, spent a significant amount of hours in police custody, went into early labor, an extraordinary amount of trauma before the police realized the image that they had was not Portia Williams. We've seen cases in the UK as well. So this is not only a challenge in the US. We've seen racist algorithms when it comes to visa applications. We've seen predictive policing algorithms that have been deemed racist and should not be used because they were discriminating. We've seen also in New Jersey, another man arrested using facial recognition technology. But what we've also seen with many of these cases which present the risks of the technology is a movement to protect the rights, a movement for activism. And we've got to think about those risks as we are building this technology. So when you think about something as simple as your image being taken by a camera, you're just thinking about it as someone's taking a picture of me and eventually, you know, that picture may be discarded. You've not asked yourself, of course, how is this technology being built? where did all that data come from? Of course, it came from the internet, places like Facebook, where many of these companies just scrape these images. But one of the things that I want you to think about, something as simple as an algorithm created all of these challenges when deployed as part of surveillance technology. It undermined freedom of expression, freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, privacy, the right to be forgotten, and of course the right to know that you're being surveilled. So what we're seeing with this technology, it's creating new stories, some really exceptional stories, but it's also perpetrating old stereotypes. And that's the atrocity of what we call the black box. So the black box is considered the brain of of any artificial intelligence technology. And in that brain, and it's really not something that you can see, feel, or touch. It's just all of the calculations that are happening at the same time to make a decision. And this is the challenge. Because of the largeness of data sets, because of the opacity of data sets, and because many of the data scientists and technologists who are creating this technology still don't understand why this technology is doing what it's doing, you have this black box making decisions, and many of those decisions are not transparent, not accountable, and not explainable. Here are some quotes that I just want to throw out there because I know we have a question and answer time coming up. Deborah Raji, who is considered a really solid voice in this space, says, many of these algorithms are just automating stereotypes because what we are seeing are inherited fables about, of course, blackness and brownness, crystallized in data and presented as fact, fed into algorithms. Those are the data sets that we're working with. And Dr. Joy Buolamwini, and you may know Joy's work from the Netflix documentary Coded Bias that features her life. Actually, Ruha Benjamin, speaks about default discrimination as part of design, making us understand why design justice is so important. And what Ruha Benjamin, and Ruha is a professor out at Princeton, and she wrote this book called The New Jim Code, Race After Technology. And she says that we've got to reimagine the ways in which we are designing tech, because our default in the design process could be discrimination. So when we think about these ethical concerns, and when we think about designing responsible technology, we have got to think about these stereotypes and these unconscious patterns. And we've got to think about those default lenses through which Black, Indigenous, people of color data continues to be defined. We've got to think about those default depictions. And all of this really pulled together nicely in the book Algorithms of Oppression by Dr. Safia Noble. So when we think about the risks of this technology, we're thinking about the imbalance that we continue to see filtered into our data sets. And now for Dr. Joy Buolamwini, and I think if you haven't seen Coded Bias, you need to take a look at it on Netflix. And she says up to 77.4% of subjects in our mainstream data set are male, and up to 94.6% are lighter-skinned male. And Dr. Buolamwini, who considers herself not only a computer scientist, but a poet of code, calls it the pale male data set. And she says those are the data sets that are being used to design this technology, which could become very critical when we think about it being deployed in commercial settings for Black and brown individuals. So what these examples were, really examples for you to see some of those risks. Discrimination, marginalization, profiling, victimization, extraordinary amount of trauma, and institutional betrayal, because many of the institutions and agencies using algorithms are those institutions and agencies that have been erected to protect us, to serve us, to provide us with the requisite kinds of services that we need. So many individuals are now interacting with service providers, public benefits agencies, and realizing that many of the responses they keep getting is the computer said so. The fact that you no longer have benefits or your benefits have been denied is because of the computer gave us that information. It's not us. We're not biased. We have nothing against you. It's just the computer that doesn't like you, right? So when we think about those ethical concerns, we have got to really drill deep into this technology. We know that it's amazing. No one is questioning the transformative power of the technology. We are seeing more and more companies and agencies experimenting. With that experimentation, you're seeing mass exploration. You're seeing, let's say, China doing an extraordinary amount of work when it comes to AI and gathering data in Africa. You're seeing every big tech company with headquarters everywhere else in the world. We're seeing the ways in which AI is being used to expand, and some people are calling it a new form of colonization. We're seeing these big models being called frontier models. And if you understand anything about frontierism and how the American frontier was won, then you would understand the parallel between this technology and the kinds of ways it is now being deployed, the ways in which we are seeing the behavior of many of these big tech companies as reflective of what was considered the gold rush, the monetization. When you ask yourself, how did a company like Facebook, now Meta, become a $1 trillion company on what? On data, on those emojis, on those likes, on those shares, on those fantastic photographs that we shared and we continue to share. But we're also seeing where there is monetization and monopolization, this technology can be weaponized against individuals like Mr. Williams, like Portia Woodruff, like many individuals whose images were part of these large data sets. And we've got to always think about the oppressive approaches. So my work as a critical data scientist is about really challenging those traditional beliefs, uncovering those false beliefs as well, and scrutinizing this technology. So when we say we are working at the intersection of tech and social justice and racial justice, environmental justice, it is because we're realizing that data justice is critical, algorithmic justice critical, and we've got to also think about the ways in which we are designing. So the long-term impacts, and I've outlined that to you. We know that we need to interrogate the power, the politics, the privilege, and the prejudice that comes with this technology, and the identities that are being created and denied, the systems that are being built and destroyed, the structures that are being removed, and some of them are being upheld. Because what we continue to see with this technology would be that this technology can have extraordinary impact on deploy with it harms that continue to really shake things up when we are thinking about the kinds of cognitive injustices that many individuals and communities have been experiencing. So data trauma is something that I've introduced into the conversation and something that I want you to think about. And what we're seeing with data trauma is that many individuals are now having traumatic experiences with algorithms being built using data. So we know that historically, different communities have historically experienced data differently. We also know, and it's something that I say all the time, is that data sets do not have the luxury of historic amnesia. Data sets do not forget. They carry with them all the good experiences, the good decisions, as well as the negative decisions. When we think about those criminal justice data sets, those historic data sets that were used to build those risk assessment tools that made 2 juveniles face tougher sentences than 2 career criminals, then we've got to ask ourselves, what are we building with this data? What kind of technology are we deploying? Because what we've come to see is that data is suffused with a cultural meaning that is independent of its computational. The computational is one thing. It is how that data is analyzed and visualized and the kinds of decisions made with that data that changes the game. So with data trauma, what we're seeing is that communities of color, high needs communities, at-risk communities, impacted communities, really now shaking under the deployment of AI, because many of these technologies really creating further instability, really undermining the resilience of communities. We're seeing those racial disparities. We're seeing the wealth, the health of communities really being impacted in very real ways. So for us to get this equitable and just technology, we've got to be bold enough to acknowledge and address questions of victimization and marginalization in the data. We've got to unpack those intergenerational data trauma. We've got to really think about the multi-generational data harms that continue in many of these historic data sets. And of course, we've got to start to reimagine the relationships that we have, our communities have with data, because it's a question of trust. If you go into certain communities and you ask to collect your data, you're going to get a different response if you go into other communities and you ask to collect data. So you've got to think about that, because this is what we do know, is that data corroborates a certain conceptualization of reality. Data is not reality. Data is an interpretation that is mediated by the viewpoints and the abilities of those who are using it. So for us to get a just and equitable future using artificial intelligence, we have got to get right with our data, which is critical, and that requires data equity. So data equity is really bringing a justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion approach to the kinds of ways in which we are using data, thinking about data, deploying data, building any kind of system with data. Data equity is like a real-time response to some of those historic inequalities and systemic inequities. So as we think about data and as we think about this technology, we have got to know that the data has got to be interrogated. Data is never free of human judgment. All data, not created equally. There's this appearance of neutrality, an appearance of objectivity, but there's also this memory of intergenerational trauma. So everything from how we collect, analyze, store, present, use, dispose, even afterlife data, we have got to think about how that data is being processed, packaged, sold, resold. We've got to think about that. We've got to ask questions about human oversight, human-centered design, the levels of security and accuracy, whether or not the ways in which this technology is being built is traceable, whether or not it's documented, whether or not we are getting clear user information as we download these apps that we just click and click and click and click and click right to the end, not even reading what we are clicking. But in truth and in fact, a study has been done, and were we to even try to read any of those consent forms on our phone, it's pretty much going to take us about 2 to 3 months. So always remember, those disclaimers are designed by corporate lawyers who are protecting the interests of tech companies, not the interest of users. So data activism is very critical to this work. Data activism is really about using data in ways in which we can retell, update, and rewrite our stories, as opposed to following a very oppressive, hierarchical social disorder that continues to reinforce false narratives in our data sets. Data justice. I cannot speak to you more if you've not heard about data justice. It's a great time to Google it. And what data justice really says is that we have got to think about data in a way that is just, equitable, and fair. And we've got to ask ourselves whether or not we are being represented equitably and fairly when it comes to our own data. So for us to get data trauma under control, for us to bring equity to the data space and uplift data justice, we've got to demystify data and AI. We've got to democratize it. We've got to decolonize it. And we know that we've got to use data to empower. So if we are to do a just and equitable future, we've got to ensure that we do more of these conversations that speak to public trust and public confidence, and how do we build legitimacy and integrity. And building integrity into a system means that we have got to think about interdisciplinary collaboration. So at the School of Data Science at UVA, we really lift up values, and we really lift up data justice and data activism and data equity, because these are so important to us. And at the School of Data Science, I teach big data ethics, because one of the things that we want to ensure is our data scientists understand what responsible data science is, what is good data science, and the kinds of social responsibilities that data scientists now have, because data scientists are now the architects of our future. Those are the ones who are building these algorithms. So when we are thinking about data science, it's not a standalone space. It needs every other discipline: economists, criminologists, psychologists, social workers, teachers. We've got to do that. So we know there's no AI without data. We know there's no Gen AI without data. We know that we need high quality data, and for us to get that, the only way we're going to get that is really thinking critically about representation on those data sets, really building up our stakeholder engagement, and really understanding that data and AI literacy are critical, and not only for students, but critical across all levels. Democracy also very critical because it's about deception, it's about trust, and everyone's talking about deep fakes in the election. It's also about bringing an approach that is justice-oriented and trauma-informed. It's about human-centered design, which is so critical. A lot has been going on in New York City. The one takeaway that I want you to have is something called Empire AI. And Empire AI is really the approach by the governor that really seeks to corral all universities to work on bringing New York into a very sophisticated AI reality, ensuring the workforce in New York is the most AI savvy and AI sophisticated. $400 million in public funding that's going to go to building a state-of-the-art AI computing center in New York and combining the research power of all of these universities. And before I end, I must put a plug for public interest technology. And public interest technology is really a real-time response to some of the risks that we're seeing with AI, because it really speaks to include, empower, liberate, protect, and advance public interest, always having justice at its core. And when we think about a just and equitable future for AI, we've got to think about the legacies. This is an extraordinary technology with the ability to create legacies, with the ability to create access and create opportunities, but it's also a technology that has the ability to deny access, deny opportunities, and undermine resources. And the one thing that we don't ever want to do with AI is use a technology that's going to undermine a legacy, that's going to undermine a community, or that's just going to undermine a dream. And the one thing we don't ever want to ask an algorithm to do is to teach us what it means to be human again. And with that, I thank you.
Oh. It is hot. I was gonna say. It's like, is this on AI or climate change in this room? Because I'm feeling, everyone's feeling pretty hot. We could have had this room with this temperature for the climate justice one in the fall. So let's give another round of applause, please, to Professor Renée Cummings, who, despite this heat, has given us so much information, so much information, and such a wonderful framing of the topic. Thank you so much, Renée. I would like now to introduce my colleague and friend who has disappeared. There she is. Okay. My colleague and friend, and I would say a bit of a mentor, actually. Okay. Professor Sonia R. Jarvis has been at the Marx School since 2004 and was the Ackerman Chair from 2005 to 2007. I'd also like to shout out to Ryan Smith, also a former chair, right here in the room with us tonight. After being the Ackerman Chair, Sonia was the director of the Center for Equality, Pluralism, and Policy from 2008 to 2012. She is an accomplished attorney and scholar whose research and teaching have been focused on race, politics, and the media. Her legal practice focuses on civil rights, civil liberties, minority businesses, and counseling nonprofit organizations. Professor Jarvis has written several book chapters and papers, including, and a book actually, including the recently published book, States of Confusion, How New Voter ID Requirements Fail Democracy and What to Do About It, NYU Press, co-authored with our colleagues from the Marx School, Don Wiesen and Nicole Gordon. An active member of several professional associations and academic organizations, Professor Jarvis has served in a variety of administrative positions, including most notably as the executive director of the National Coalition on Black Voter Participation, Incorporated, and managing director of the Center for National Policy Review Clinic, formerly based at Catholic University of America's Columbus School of Law. Professor Jarvis graduated from Stanford University with a BA in Political Science and Honors and Distinctions, and a BA in Psychology, followed by a JD from the Yale School of Law. Sonia, I would love to welcome you up here to be in conversation with Renée, and we will try to keep this a bit brief, but the reality is that I'm really excited to hear. You mentioned playing, and I think this is time to play and to delve into some of the topics you talked about. Please hold your questions until after the discussion, but we will have time for audience questions. So, Sonia, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I think if you're like me, I'm still.
One more second.
One more second. Closer,
Just so that
closer.
everyone online can hear you. Yep,
That's right.
Go ahead.
I'm still rocking and rolling from the very, very informative information you shared with us. For those of us who don't know what AI is, I think you do now. For those who already knew but didn't understand the risk that's involved here, I think we have a better sense of that. And as part of our time together, I just wanted to pick apart a couple of areas that you had identified in your presentation, but also to invite those of you who want to ask questions and have more detail. We're going to leave some time for that. So if we're starting from a social responsibility platform, what should we be doing? Those of us who are concerned that AI might be used in a way that's not positive. Where do we start?
Thank you so much for that question. I think it starts with awareness, and with that awareness comes the education and the information that is required. AI is about all of us. AI is being built with our data. We are in so many data sets, we cannot even imagine how that data is scraped, how it is packaged, repackaged, and resold. So you've got to ask yourself, what's happening with my data? And you've also got to really be conscious of how this technology is being built, the places that algorithms are being used, and the decisions that may be made about you that you may not know. So it's really a prerequisite for all of us to bring that requisite level of due diligence into the space as we think about the algorithm. And now is a great time to think about it because an election is
It's
approaching,
coming,
right?
yes.
And one of the things that we're hearing a lot is about how AI is going to really inform the election. Questions around deep fakes and, of course, the cloning of politicians and their voices. And just also thinking about where we can use this technology, particularly something like ChatGPT to make our politicians more accountable or to really enhance our voter rights. This technology can also be very dangerous. And you've got to ask yourself, the information that I'm being fed, is that the information that I've asked for? Is that information allowing me to make informed decisions? So I think just because we exist, we have a place in this AI game, and we've got to take it very seriously.
Well, and we also know that there hasn't been much regulation by law so far. And if we are concerned about how AI can be used against individuals, where should we start with that?
Well, that's a challenge because the Bill of Rights, the executive order, and the memo coming out of the Office of Management and Budget, those are just frameworks for us to behave in a way that brings integrity to the business process. None of them actually binding, and that's the challenge. I think many of the world leaders are realizing that this technology offers them extraordinary geopolitical power. So at one hand, they want to regulate because they want to protect us. On the other hand, they want to give those technologists and big tech companies the space to create, to see how far this technology can go, because they've already realized who owns the data owns the world, and our data is now like our DNA. So who would have thought that the things that we liked and disliked and our photographs and just sharing these intimate moments about ourselves, just aggregate data, would have become trillion-dollar profits for companies. So it's really an understanding that while there is regulation happening, of course, in the EU, and all countries are putting together these strategies. That's where the Brussels effect kicks in, because we have countries like the U.S. hoping that, of course, compliance and this type of soft regulation will not hamper innovation, and whether or not we can do ethical innovation is a question that continues to be asked.
We don't know.
We don't know, but I think we can, and we just have to really, at this stage, the technology is so ahead of the law
that there is no way the law can catch up. And then something like ChatGPT requires, because it's always changing, it's always reinventing itself. The data is always learning from itself. So how do you regulate something that you cannot see? And that's the challenge.
And so if we're talking about data justice, where do we start? What's the best way to encourage people to understand your data is at risk now? It is no longer yours. Why? Because you don't even know where it is. If you knew where it was, you might be able to protect it. But if someone is taking information and using it in a way that you're not aware of, how do you do that?
Well, first of all, if you're doing any kind of business, you have the right to ask if an algorithm is being used. If a decision was made about you, you have the right to ask if this was a human decision, whether or not it was an algorithmic decision. You've got to ask what sort of data were they using on you. The thing about data, it does not often allow us to change our minds. So depending on where the data and when the data was captured, that is the data that's being used.
Yes.
For data justice, it's really about individuals being empowered with their data. It's that understanding that questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion are critical to the ways in which research is being done, data is being collected, products are being designed, and really becoming active in those conversations as well.
But DEI is under attack. So what are we going to do?
Well, what we are going to do is realize that.
No. I didn't mean it that way.
I know exactly what you mean.
I really didn't mean it
but
that
no,
way.
no. But what we've got to do is realize how critical it is. Inclusive technology is very important.
Yes.
Inclusive design is very important. The failures that we continue to see with AI and generative AI and the kinds of toxic content that is often deployed with these technologies, or the ways in which the technologies are being used by bad actors, is because of the lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in those data sets, because of the lack of representation. So for us to get this technology right, we've got to get ourselves right. And for us to get ourselves right, we've got to understand the importance of inclusion, the importance of equity, and the importance of diverse data sets. When you think of healthcare, and you think of the decisions that are being made using algorithms in healthcare, and you think about the fact that healthcare equity is still something that's not realized, or the fact that black and brown data is still underrepresented in cancer research or in any kind of healthcare research, then we've got to understand that there are communities that are being underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, and those are very important questions and spaces that this technology is being used.
And so to build on that, if we're talking about representation, who do we appeal to? Who do we ask? Do we ask our schools? Do we ask our attorneys? Who are we asking now to assist us in figuring out this process that's
Unconscious bias. You are a family, but we have enough knowledge out there that speaks about the importance of representation and diversity and equity and inclusion. I mean, companies have spent billions of dollars doing that kind of training. We have to ask ourselves, why is it that the designers of this technology are still, asking questions about who's at the table?
and who isn't?
Exactly.
Well, and building on that, finally, I was going to ask you to tell us a little more about the frontier model that you were talking about during your discussion, because it seems that we're going back in time, and maybe part of our efforts together is to stay ahead of the curve rather than going too far back.
Well, definitely. So many of these large models are being referred to as frontier models, and frontier being a metaphor that is taken from the American frontier and how that frontier was won. And what you're seeing is that these big tech companies are just moving into space. They're just expanding in those spaces. There's an extraordinary amount of exploitation. There's a lack of regulation, so it feels like a gold rush, and everyone's trying to get in there and grab what they can get and come out. And then once they're out, then they talk about ethics, and they talk about the ways in which we need to regulate the technology. But we also know because of the power of this technology and what this technology is doing for nation states and advancing nation states, and not only in education, but when we think of national security,
Sure.
when we think about defense, when we think about so many things that we can't even imagine that's being done with this technology, then we understand the power of this technology. So it really is a way, it's also a stereotype, actually, frontierism, and it really allows a particular group to access a particular kind of power and really do things in that space that really harms many other communities, because we know the way the frontier was won, and we knew what happened to our indigenous people and our first people as well. So we need to think about that.
Okay. And as we now get ready to have some folks come up to the microphone to ask you some questions, I'm just wondering if we had to identify ways that this community could become more engaged in being part of that backdrop to say, wait a minute, let's look at this and make sure it's not discriminating against various groups. Where should we start?
Well, I will say All Tech is Human right here in New York, and you can access them online. And they really provide diverse, equitable, inclusive conversations, and they bring all the leaders into conversation, and really impactful conversations as well. Anything to do with technology and dealing with some of what they call the wicked problems of tech, and the ways in which we need to respond in real time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we're going to open it up.
Yes. Thank you.
And please, just a quick reminder for those who are not in the room with us, we want to make sure that you speak when you're asking your questions right into the microphone so that the live stream folks can hear. Thank you. Please go ahead.
I'm Michael Myers. I'm the president of the New York Civil Rights Coalition.
Hello, Mr. Myers.
Hello.
My question to you is, you have painted a very grim picture of the future, which is now. The 21st century technology should be exciting, should be inviting. It shouldn't be scary. And so my question to you is, in a world of 21st century technology, where are the dimensions of positive realism, of changing the human, of changing society in ways that the human dimension is expanded as opposed to narrowized, breaking racial stereotypes?
Oh, fantastic question. Of course.
Let me finish my question.
And more?
Let me finish my question.
Oh, okay.
Now, don't forget the first part.
Okay.
The second part is, yes, with respect to there are dangers, but there are also positives. I mean, we used to have people who helped students write essays and things like that, take tests or prepare for tests. Now, artificial technology or artificial information, the computer can write essays for you. It can tell you how to write an answer to a test question or an application for law school or how to get into professional schools. You don't have to go to people anymore. You can go to the computer and it will write for you. Now, you should rewrite it, but I think that's exciting. That's not something that's negative.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Okay, yes,
Fantastic.
please.
Sure. So when I was speaking, I said we appreciate all the rewards, and we know the rewards of the technology. So although I'm an AI ethicist, I'm also a developer of technology. So at the moment, I'm working on a piece of technology that deploys virtual reality into the criminal justice space, something that's very exciting, that really ensures that rehabilitation is done in real time and makes it very immersive. It's called immersive justice. So there are great things happening with the technology. I spoke about the fact that generative AI has the ability to predict a protein structure. Do you know what that is? That's absolutely amazing. We know that we're seeing this technology do brilliant things in healthcare, particularly cancer research. And at UVA, we're very committed to that. So those are the great things. And we know the technology is transformative. So you've heard that word. So that speaks to the greatness. But we also know that we need all groups to experience the greatness. We also know something like facial recognition impacts already impacted communities. So for us to get the rewards, we've got to understand the risks. For us to really harness the power of the technology, we've got to get the rights correct. So if we don't get those risks under control and we don't get those rights protected, then we're not going to experience the benefits of the technology. ChatGPT is exciting, yes it is. Whether or not it is the be-all and end-all of the intellectual experience, no, it's not. ChatGPT is a language model, it is not a knowledge model, and sometimes the content looks factual, but it is fake. And I think one of the things we need to encourage our students is, of course, understand that, of course, they could use the technology, but you've got to bring the critical thinking and the understanding to know that even those large language models, those data sets are very, very toxic. Many of those data sets are creating havoc. We read, yes, it can write you a law school application, but what about that lawyer who used it, right? To deploy that brief, right? So those are the risks. And for us to get the rewards, we've got to understand that. And it is a very exciting time for technology. I always say since the advent of the printing press, this is the next big thing, right? Artificial intelligence. The challenge is, it's the new and emerging technology. The challenge is we're building something that we still don't understand. The challenge is if something is so opaque and not accountable and not transparent and has the ability to destroy legacies, how do we protect those groups? How do we ensure it's equitable? Because if you looked at those figures, those trillion-dollar figures, you would realize only certain groups have been able to monetize our data. We're not all billionaires in here, but we have billions of data points out there in the world, right? So yeah, thank you very much.
We have another question.
Please, go ahead.
Hi there, Professor Cummings. It's always wonderful to be able to hear you speak. And I just want to say I was also at the CIDA conference, and it's wonderful to hear you present again today because every time you speak, you say something different that opens my mind. So thank you so much for your work. I want to actually bring us to CUNY specifically, and I want to ask to just share a concern that I have about the Education Advisory Board, EAB, which is the company that actually CUNY contracted for 5 years, I think in 2018. So actually, I think that this contract should have been updated in 2023. But I actually have had difficulty finding more information about it. And that's the company that runs Navigate. So we as professors within the CUNY system, and I should say I'm an assistant professor at York College in Jamaica, Queens, we are encouraged to use this platform to be able to help with advisement of our students. And I think it's very important because it does help us to connect with our students and to better serve them. But at the same time, I'm very worried about what's happening with all the data that's going into Navigate. And I'm also concerned about the fact, like I would say Jennifer Harrington, who's the Assistant Director of Academic Advisement here at Baruch's Mark School, she actually commented in an article that was published in 2018 through our union, PSC CUNY, that she was saying, look at all the money that was spent on CUNY first, on developing it, and yet the college doesn't put the resources into academic advisors. So to go back to what was said previously about the excitement about using computers over humans, the advisors are not there to actually help to make the changes for advisement that could be made as those that were made at Georgia State University, which had incredible improvements because they paired academic advisors and hiring academic advisors with these systems. So number one, I would say I'm so concerned about what is happening with this data and the fact that I am, as a professor, actually contributing to it, but I don't have any idea of what CUNY is doing with it. Like, does CUNY own that data, or did they buy the system and EAB owns it? So sorry, I'm not asking this question to you, but I want to just share with my colleagues.
Sure.
These are the questions that come to my mind when I think about Professor Cummings' work. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I will just say a few words on this, only because I was one of the faculty members who asked a question about this at our Baruch Faculty Senate years and years ago. Before all of this, but I did have a feeling that I'd read some articles on algorithmic bias back then, right? And so I don't have the answers to all your questions, but I will get your name to try and find out, because this is important. I'm on the University Faculty Senate. We are very concerned. I've co-organized 2 mini conferences in the past 4 months on this, right? And so I just want to say, there are, as Professor Cummings has described, there are benefits and costs of this technology. And I think, again, to our other participants' note, there are many benefits, right? Within CUNY, not just Georgia, CUNY has seen it. John Jay is here. This sort of technology can, and there's some of our staff members here who can probably speak to the potential and the possibilities, as Professor Cummings said in the beginning. There are serious costs, and I think what I'm hearing you say is that we need to be investing in understanding the costs. I don't mean the money costs, though I'm an economist, but there are lots of different costs, and some of the costs are that, you know, as Professor Cummings has brought up, could be happening right now, and we're not aware of it. So I thank you for bringing that up. I think it really does speak to everything you were talking about, Professor Cummings, and so I will hand this back to you, unless there's one more question. Yes, please go ahead, and then I will let you both just say a quick word. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, and thank you for this wonderful lecture. My question is, through your research, through all the information and engagement with different people, have you learned of nations or anyone that's including communities in their feedback and within the A design process to ensure this tech aligns with the ethical values and also the diverse stakeholders?
Thank you so much for that question. Of course, even here in the U.S., communities are participating in the conversation. All of these are being ventilated publicly, and there are public spaces, of course, where you can put your comments in there and have your voice heard. The challenge is, how do we define stakeholders? Because many of the stakeholders are already very well-funded nonprofits who are having those voices. So whether or not everyday people have a chance, no. But you're seeing things, in other parts of the world, and particularly when we think about places like New Zealand and Australia, where they're very committed to indigenous data and very committed to data governance and data stewardship, and having those voices lead the conversation. So yes, it's happening. Some countries paying more attention to those voices, and in other places, as I said, this technology is just moving so quickly. It's like today you say one thing, and then by tonight there's a slew of other articles that have come out. So it really is about keeping pace, and it's so hard to keep pace with technology. But yes, there are, particularly I would say Australia, New Zealand, where I've seen really innovative approaches to data stewardship and data governance.
And we have to figure out who's going to put that action together to engage communities and make sure that they're paying attention to what's happening on a day-to-day basis, because it is moving so fast. And we don't know what's happening tomorrow. So if that's how fast it's moving, who's going to help us keep track? Yes?
Yes, that is correct. And it is exactly 7:30.
Yes, it is.
But 30 seconds, if you don't mind, I have to say some thank yous. That's okay. If you have to leave, we understand, and I want to thank you for those who are walking out. But first, Professor Cummings, that was fantastic. As another participant mentioned, it was actually, there was some overlap, but there are many different angles that you brought up, and just giving us the lay of the land and such rich information on a Thursday evening, right here. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing all of yourself to this. I'll start with that. My colleague, Sonia Jarvis, I could have sat here and listened to the two of you for the next 3 hours. Probably have to take the jacket off because of the heat, but that was just wonderful. I thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank some special guests here at this table from the Consul General of Trinidad and Tobago. We appreciate your presence here. We appreciate you supporting our former student and your national. Thank you. Of course, I want to thank the Engelmans. Thank you so much, Erwin and Rosalind, for being here. We appreciate your presence in every way, in any way, online or in person, but we're happy to have you here in person with us this evening. Marianne, I think you can see me in this owl. Thank you so much for being here, and also thank you for the words and the framing and the history of your family. I want to thank the staff who's here, and I'm not sure. There you are. Thank you so much. We appreciate, not you, sorry, not yet, Diana. The staff who is taking care of this conference room. I want to thank you for setting everything up, taking care of all the food. We appreciate what you do, and we appreciate you making this event possible. Now, Diana, I'm coming to you. Sorry. The other staff, our staff of the Marks School. Diana, I want to thank you so much, and your staff who's here, several other folks, and of course our dean, thank you for putting together this program and making this all possible. And then finally, last but not least, I want to thank each and every one of you. There's some of you who I know, and I'm very grateful to see faces that I know and I recognize, and former colleagues who just retired who are still showing up for Marks. That's when you know. That's when you know, when people who are already retired are showing up for excellent lectures. Thank you, John. I want to thank all of you who I don't know. I hope this will not be your last Ackerman Lecture. We will be hosting these we've been hosting them every semester for many, many years. We hope to see you in the fall. And please go get some fresh air and take some water on the way out. All right. Thank you all.